Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
In a single day, we are making hundreds, thousands of decisions that alter our course of life. Some more than others. But the decisions that we make cannot be discounted. The cumulative effect of them paves a path for us to follow. And when we look back, we can usually identify the decision that led us to that point, or the series of decisions that got us there. These choices can be as simple as what time we leave for work, a new trail to hike, or even stopping for coffee at a different location. The opportunities for your life to change completely are endless, and they are etched in our own habits. Yet, the decisions we make play a magnificent or destructive role. For Lauren, that decision was to head to Death Valley. For Jay, that was to follow Bub's Creek. It was the decision taking the farthest back seat available. It was the choice to take the scenic route into vistas of breathtaking beauty and mountains towering above. Every decision was made to be on that plane. As the Cessna 182P flew through the Sierra Nevada mountain range, there was a sudden and unfathomable change. Jay realized that they were somewhere other than where he intended, and he made the choice not to alarm the small number of passengers. The wind for which the wings of the plane glide upon shifted, catching the small aircraft in a downdraft and sending it directly into the sheer mountainside. The next choice that Lauren made was to survive. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello. Welcome back. I am your host, Kayla, and thank you so much for joining me today. For those of you who celebrate Christmas, I just got our tree up, very first tree in our very first home, and realized a couple things that I didn't quite make the connection on previously. Like, for example, the ornaments that you buy from the store don't come with little hooks so that way you can hang them on the tree. So we'll be working on that. I think I got some string that we can probably use to tie them on. And then I thought the number of strands of lights that I had was going to be enough. And it turns out that it is not for my decorating style. So just some things that we are going to make notes of for next year. So that way we can, learn from what we're doing. And then as well, we've also got like this perfect snowy day. Like the snow is just like lazily falling from the sky and it's coating the sidewalks, and the ground has been covered in snow, but it's got a fresh layer and it's just really beautiful. And I'm hoping that you're enjoying this season as much as I am. Very quickly before we get into this episode, Macy, thank you so much for joining us as a Patreon subscriber. And speaking of Patreon, if you want to head over there and find the post from December 6th, that is the post where you can vote on where this year's profits are going to. I will also post the link in the notes for this episode. So please take a moment, go over there, vote for where you want this year's profits going. You do not need to be a subscriber. This is going to be open to everyone since it's listener based and not subscriber only based. So please take a moment, go vote. Let me know your thoughts. I really appreciate you all helping me to do this. Today's story is actually starting on my brother's birthday. It's just a different year. We are millennials, and so these events took place almost 2 decades prior to when we were born. So moving forward, April 26th, 1976, a Cessna 182P was carted out to the runway. It is a small 4-seat plane with a single engine that has been reliable for carrying both passengers and cargoes in cross-country travel. It can travel 915 miles on a single tank of gas or fuel, or 1,472 kilometers. And the cabin is actually larger than the other models, which makes a huge difference in comfort for the very small number of people that it is carrying. But the downside to this plane is that its size reduces its ability to handle elevation, and the size only makes it more susceptible to updrafts and downdrafts or turbulence, which requires pilots to take quick action to stabilize the plane. In updrafts, the plane is lifted and the speed increases, which results in temporary loss of control. And then with downdrafts, the plane will slow down or decrease its speed. And this is also dangerous because it can cause a loss of altitude, loss of control. And along with the loss of speed, this provides the potential that the plane's engine could stall. And now you have less space to get the engine started again before you collide with the ground. Jay Fuller, who was the 36-year-old pilot, was getting ready to fly his plane from Oakland International Airport to Furnace Creek Air Valley, which is a roughly 400-mile flight. He was intending to follow Bubbs Creek to Kearsarge Pass. Also in this plane, sitting right next to him, was his girlfriend, Jean Noller. Last on the plane and deciding to sit in the farthest back seat rather than the seat directly behind Jay and Jean was 29-year-old Lauren Elder. Lauren's boyfriend, Jim Fisdale, was supposed to go on this sightseeing trip, but Jim had to back out last minute due to work, and instead of canceling altogether, Lauren decided that she was going to go enjoy the trip anyways. And as a side note, or for more context, this entire trip was actually for Jay and Jean to go pick up their cat, which they had lost during this exact same flight previously. A park ranger had found the cat, so they were now going to retrieve it and asked if Jim and Lauren wanted to come along. The trip was purely by plane, so the event was this flight. Jay and Jim knew each other because they both worked at a veterinary clinic where Jay was a veterinarian, and I'm not sure what Jim's role was at the vet's office, but he worked there and they knew each other. They became friends, and then Lauren was introduced to Jay and Jean from Jim's friendship with them. The intent while sightseeing was to get an aerial view of the Sierra Nevadas, fly into the civilian airport in Death Valley, have a picnic here at Furnace Creek, and then fly back home. We have talked about the Sierra Nevadas before, and like I try to do with every episode, I'm trying to give you some new information or build off what was previously stated without leaving out any of the smaller details. So if you've listened to the previous episodes where we've gone to the Sierra Nevada mountain range, bear with me. The Sierra Nevada mountain range is located in western United States, like California Western. It starts in Southern California and Northern Nevada and travels north to south and is known for its extreme elevation. The range itself is 400 miles long and averages 11,000 feet or 3,353 meters in elevation, which is taller than anywhere else in the continental United States. It contains several peaks that are taller than 12,000 feet, and it is home to the tallest mountain in the lower 48 states, which is Mount Whitney at 14,505 feet or 4,421 meters in elevation. The range, with its aggressive terrain, was formed 40 to 100 million years ago due to volcanic activity coupled with the tectonic plates shifting where one was traveling above or below the other. And the most recent growth of this range was 3 to 5 million years ago due to the tectonic plates shifting, and then the mountainsides eroded, giving it the very dramatic peaks we see today. Jay was kind of a recreational pilot, not that that is saying that he's not a qualified pilot, but working as a veterinarian meant that he didn't have the same amount of time to commit to flying as others. But he still had 213 hours of flight time rounding him out and 46 hours with this specific plane. So specifically when it comes to getting a private pilot license, the minimum of flight hours is 40 hours, which is much less than I expected it to be. Generally, license applications see hours closer to the 70-hour mark, but still, the private license allows you to fly for transportation, not compensation. So what he's doing here, where he's taking his girlfriend and a couple of friends to go pick up a cat, is definitely falling under that category. In the commercial flight world, you need many more hours, looking at 190 to 250 hours depending on the program, which also allows you to do flight instruction. And then the pilots that are flying our airline planes require a minimum of 1,500 hours, and you also have to work as a co-pilot first for a major airline. And while technology has drastically improved the safety of flying, one thing is clear for all pilots, and that is mountains are hard to fly in. They are difficult because the air currents are being manipulated as the wind breezes by peaks and through valleys. They create strong updrafts and downdrafts that can fight against the engine of a plane. And all of this is surrounded by the fact that at the elevation and speed planes fly over mountain ranges, it is difficult for the human mind to process the depth perception, which is part of the reason why so many smaller planes have crashed into mountainous regions. For pilots, it's just so difficult to judge the space that they have between peaks. In addition to this, for smaller planes, the FAA requires that supplemental oxygen be supplied in planes that are flying for over 30 minutes at 12,500 to 14,000 feet in elevation. And then if you fly above 14,000 feet, that supplemental oxygen needs to be supplied for the entire flight. Without this supplemental oxygen, you are not pulling in enough from the air around you. Similar to mountaineers who are climbing into the death zone, the potential for pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, high altitude sickness, as well as some more minor but no less life-threatening symptoms such as euphoria, numbness, alterations in vision, and poor decision-making. But Jay was a dependable man. He flew frequently, he had a boat, he was a professional veterinarian and a father. Jay and Jean knew Laura more from just kind of hanging out with her and Jim, and at first Laura was hesitant to join them without Jim, but then she decided to go anyways. As an artist, she was hoping to find some creative inspiration along the way. Prior to loading up, Lauren had a moment where she really thought that maybe she shouldn't get on this plane. But she pushes this thought down because she is thinking that her anxiety will ruin Jean's fun or annoy Jay. The route that Jay had intended to take meant that they would not be flying over any of the large mountains. They were going to follow this system of rivers and valleys and cut through the range rather than go over the high parts. The day was perfect for sightseeing as there wasn't a cloud in the sky, but it was windy. As Jay maneuvered through the range, he tilted the plane this way and that as he passed by mountains. He allowed the updrafts and downdrafts to kind of pull the plane a bit, giving the sensation of being on a roller coaster high in the sky. None of them thought much about this, and Lauren was actually enjoying the flight. But there is one important part of this that may have played a massive role in the enjoyment held on this flight. There was no supplemental oxygen. Despite flying much of the time between that 12,500 and 14,000 feet area, which, as we already covered, this flight should have had some oxygen on board. It is difficult to know whether Jay accidentally started following a different creek route or if he kind of last minute just decided to go a different way. But when he suddenly realized that they were off course, he found that instead of being near Kearsarge Pass, they were instead in Center Basin.
I'm Dean, I'm the dad.
I'm Laura, I'm the mom.
And I'm Arthur, I'm the son.
And together we are
Family Plot.
Plot Podcast is the best history podcast that we can make.
Like intellectual pancakes for the soul.
I've been called the cool dad you want to take a road trip with and learn about history from.
One of our listeners said listening to me was like Mom reading you a bedtime story full of cool history, and I am here for it.
And one of our reviewers called me the snarky brother they wish they had.
So join us to learn some cool stuff,
to hear some fun banter and wild tangents.
And we are unabashedly LGBTQ friendly and trans positive and supportive.
And remember,
when you listen,
you're our family. So join us and occasionally some very cool guests
for the Family Plot Podcast.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The basin is surrounded by mountains that all climb into the 13,000 feet or higher range. The basin actually has 3 mountains immediately around it, all between 13,000 and 14,000 feet, and the ridgeline does not drop below 12,500 feet. It was as they were making their way over a crest in the ridge that Jay called over his shoulders to get ready for some incredible views. He knew where he was, he just didn't intend to come this way. Lauren in the back of the plane held up her camera and unbuckled, getting ready to take some photos of the views behind them. It was as they started to come up over the ridge that a downdraft grabbed control of the plane. The actual feeling of the flight didn't change too much, but Jay was gripping the controls, fighting to regain control of the plane's direction. Lauren glances to the front of the plane just in time to notice a granite wall seemingly moving towards them. And then they crash into the mountain. They were 15 feet below the summit. 15 feet. They almost made it. But instead, sometime later, when Lauren woke up, she found herself still inside the plane on the ridge. Jay and Jean also survived, and while Jay was able to climb out of the plane wreckage, Jean was unconscious and in her seat still. She had a huge gash on her face, and it was clear that she had a head injury. They carefully pulled her free from the plane, and then Lauren used some beer bottles that she noticed near the ridgeline to collect drops of fuel that were leaking out so that way they could have something for warmth. She did this by pouring the fuel onto the rocks around them, and they just used one of their lighters to ignite it. It was a miracle that all 3 of them survived this crash. The plane kind of cracked in half, so it wasn't totally demolished, and it was almost like it collided with the full bottom of the plane instead of head on, and it actually rolled to the left as Jay had been trying to gain control of the plane, and he was trying to turn to the left when they collided with the wall. As Lauren worked on the fire, Jay was working on getting the radio working and activating the emergency beacon. So they are still on this ridge, and it is steep with massive boulders mixed in with smaller rocks, and it's almost like a scree field. Jean was still unconscious, but she was laid out near them where they could hear her moaning and whimpering in pain. Lauren notices that Jean was in sandals, and so she decided to take off her own socks and put them on Jean, and she puts her bare feet back into her own boots, which, by the way, were like heeled, nicer boots. Like she wasn't planning to go out in the wilderness or do any hiking or anything, so she kind of dressed nice. So she had on 2-inch heeled boots, but she still thinks that her boots are better for keeping her feet warm than Jean's bare feet and her sandals are. So Lauren puts her socks on Jean and puts her boots back on her own feet. And Jean is unconscious, but seems to almost be trying to get up. So she's kind of jerking about and shifting a lot. And there really isn't a safe place for her to lay. There's not really a safe place for anyone to lay. So Lauren is kind of holding on to her, but every time Jean jerks, she's yanking Lauren along with her. Finally, Jean settles and Lauren goes to look over the ridge where she can see the landscape stretching out below. In the distance, she sees a town. A small town. She is contemplating going towards this town for help, and I found actually 2 different versions of what happens next. So in one version, Jay was near the crumpled plane while Lauren was watching as Jean suddenly convulsed again, as if having a seizure, and this caused her to start to slide down the mountainside, and she just slid right out of view of Lauren and Jay, and there was nothing for them to do to stop her. In the other, Lauren was so focused on the town that by the time she turned around, she found that Jean was gone. And when she asked Jay what happened or where she was, Jay kind of just made a motion implying that she rolled and fell off the mountain. Either way, Jean falls from where she's at, and there was nothing that Jay or Lauren could do to stop her. Jay starts to have breakdowns at this point, confessing to Lauren that he felt like he wasn't going to make it over the ridge when they were approaching it due to those downdrafts, but the Cessna was kind of already at its max for its altitude limits, so they still might not have made it over the ridge, even with circling and even with gaining altitude. But Jay is just feeling a lot of guilt here. As the sun goes down and the wind picks up, Lauren and Jay find that they can't keep their fire rock fuel system going, and so they end up curling up together in the tail end of the plane. But Jay is having a difficult time laying still, and he keeps shifting and stretching, and all of this is a sign that there's some internal damage that has occurred, probably more than either of them realize. During the night, Jay has a moment where he thrashes about. He's banging his head and his hands inside the plane, and Lauren thought that this was kind of like an emotional outburst, and when he stilled, she went back to sleep. But when the morning came, she found that it was snowing, and Jay had died during the night. Again, it's hard to determine the exact cause of death, as he had removed his blanket and his clothes, so there could have been a hypothermic event. He might have had a head injury or an internal injury that caught up with him when he finally slowed down. And in addition, they are still at high elevation. It is possible that something developed due to that, not related to the crash itself. For a long time, Lauren just sat there and stared at him. His eyes were open and glassy, and Lauren was at a complete loss for what to do. She didn't know if she should leave the plane and try to find help herself, or if she should stay with it and wait for someone to come find her. She knows that Jay had been working on activating the emergency beacon, but she has no idea if he was successful or not. But as she sat and considered, she heard a plane flying overhead. She jumped out of the tail half of the plane and frantically started waving her arms, but she was unable to get their attention. We actually don't know if this specific plane was looking for her or just flying over the range. But with this, she felt like she knew what she had to do next, and that was leave the plane and find her way out on her own. The plane crashed at 12,500 feet. She was a half mile south of Mount Bradley and about 25 miles north of Mount Whitney. For those who are familiar with this area, she was not prepared for the climb. Again, she was in 2-inch heeled boots. She had a light kind of almost like a pilot's hat on that has like the ear flaps, but it wasn't designed for that. And she is also wearing a light blouse and a wraparound skirt. And worse yet, she had been in a rush that morning and she didn't have any clean underwear, so she just went without. And this is actually something that she mentions is like during her climb out, she felt the breeze like go up her skirt, and that was always really jarring. And this is just your reminder that maybe there's a better option. Like, I don't know, turn one of those dirty pairs inside out, put on a pair of shorts. You have options. That's all I'm going to say is you have options. So she starts to make her way down one of the eastern edges because this appears to be the least steep and therefore, in her mind, the safest option. And as she goes, she's just ignoring the pain that she's feeling in her arm, and she's ignoring the cold that she is feeling. Remember, this is late April. Snow is still on the ground at this elevation. Part of the way she was able to navigate down by balancing with her hands as she walked. Some of it she had to crawl, and then there was a section where she just kind of slid down the snow. So she comes to a point where it is less steep, and now she has a new challenge, which is the knee-deep snow. Back home, Jim has been waiting for Lauren's return, and he started to worry when she hadn't come back. But he didn't do anything just yet. Not until 10-year-old Clara called him. Clara was Jay's daughter who had been home alone, and she was worried that her dad hadn't returned. So Jim goes to her home and he starts calling the airfields and search and rescue. By 2:30 a.m. on Tuesday, April 27th, the Civil Air Patrol and the Air Force were in the air searching for the missing plane. Jim had also contacted Lauren's family, which included her father, who was a World War II Navy pilot veteran, and he was at the time working as the director of flight test operations at Northrop Aviation in LA. So when he heard that his daughter was missing, he used his role to send a plane to search for the missing plane as well. The good news was that they fairly easily found the plane wreckage. The bad news was that they reported no signs of life. Meanwhile, Lauren found a waterfall and was able to drink the water from it. And then she followed the stream of water, which is so smart. And as she went, she started to have some pretty startling hallucinations. Like she thought that she was approaching houses. And when she finally got up to them, she found that they were just massive boulders. And multiple times she thought she saw people. But again, as she got closer, she found that they were just plants. One of the times in particular, she saw a woman dressed in animal skins, and Lauren tried to go up to her and talk to her, but the woman just kept ignoring her. And she figured out why as she actually approached and realized that the woman was actually a small tree. But kudos to Lauren because she made it all the way down the mountain and found herself in Independence, California. She had not just hiked off the mountain, but slid and skid her way over snow and rock, dug her fingers and toes into rock walls to descend, and much more. She was beaten up and bloody. She survived a plane crash into the mountains. She had broken teeth. She was barefoot and her clothing was torn up. And she hadn't realized it yet, but she actually broke one of her arms. She had survived a plane crash, but the small town of Independence was startled by her appearance and reluctant to help her. She had been going door to door of the homes trying to explain what happened and where she came from, but the people of this town were very on edge. And I saw some references that this was because it was the same place that Charles Manson, the criminal cult leader, had been arrested, but that had been 7 years prior. And I think that he was actually arrested closer to Death Valley. I could be wrong. I'm willing to be wrong. But there was just something about her appearance that had people very skeptical and unwilling to help her. So she just kept walking. And finally, 10 miles later, she is found. The town sheriff says her name. It comes out like a question and it stops her dead. She looks at him and asks, "How do you know my name?" And he says, "We've been looking for you. Let me help you." He takes her to Lone Pine Hospital, where she is admitted at 10 p.m. She had a broken arm that needed to be rebroke and set. She had mild frostbite, cuts and bruises all over her body, and blisters all over her feet. And finally, she also had a gash in her shin that went down to the bone that required dozens of stitches. She climbed down the mountain and walked nearly 30 miles or 50 kilometers before she finally got help. And of note, she has had people question how she climbed down on all fours with a broken arm. And there's something to be said about survival situations and just doing what needs to be done. She also mentions that the only time that she was in debilitating pain when it came to her arm was when she twisted her arm. So as long as she held it straight, she was fine. The search and rescue teams were able to locate and remove both Jay and Jean. And in a post-crash analysis, they indicate that Jay was at fault for the crash. Most of the information in the story came from the book And I Alone Survived, which was co-authored by Lauren and Shirley Straczynski. As always, thank you so much for listening. We will talk next time. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.